Force members joining us, but I'm going to start. I have 5:36. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the third town hall meeting of the Police Oversight Task Force. We're glad you're here, and we're very appreciative of you taking time out of your busy schedule to help the task force do its work on the issues that matter most to you. The Police Oversight Task Force is charged with helping the city review its entire police oversight process and making recommendations on improvements to the City Council by the end of December 2013. Tonight's meeting is the third of 4 town hall meetings that the task force will hold to hear from the community. At this time, I think there's one more town hall remaining, but it's going to be a virtual town hall, and we'll release information about that when we have it. The town hall meetings, and tonight, no exception, begin at 5:30 and are scheduled to end at 7:30 p.m. There's a flyer available, I think we still have some, at the sign-up table that has future meeting dates and times and other contact information for the task force. I would encourage you to take some flyers and post them or share them with your friends. We want to make sure that we advertise these meetings as widely as possible so we get the greatest public participation possible. Also, information about the task force can be found on our website. There's a link to our page on the City Council's website, which is at www.cabq.gov/council. The task force webpage contains PDFs of all the information handed out at each of our meetings, information and updates about future meeting locations and times, and bios of each task force member. It will also have a link to a video of this and all the other town hall meetings. Tonight's meeting really is about you. In a few moments, we'll begin taking public comment. If you haven't signed up to speak yet, there are sign-up sheets at the table by the entrance. We're going to call upon speakers in the order that they signed up. I'll call the name of the first speaker and the following 2 speakers. When you hear your name, please make your way to the front of the aisle where the microphone is. There will be a 3-minute time limit on public comment this evening. A bell will ring once, indicating you have 30 seconds remaining to wrap up your comments. At 3 minutes, a second bell will ring, indicating that your time is up. And so that we can be as productive as possible this evening, I would ask that you please refrain from personal attacks and criticism. We want to hear your concerns and comments about the police oversight process and how we can improve it. With that said, the first speaker tonight will be Karen Navarro, followed by Ben Lovato and Nicole Duranzo. Yeah. And I asked you too. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman Littman, and all task force members. I did give you my statement because 3 minutes is just not long enough, but I wanted to preface my remarks. My name is Karen Navarro, and I have worked in homeless services for 20 years, but I'm here tonight as a resident of Albuquerque, and I'm voicing my concerns about a group of folks who are often overlooked, and that is folks who are homeless. And so my concerns are a general pattern which I've observed over many years and that has either stayed the same or gotten worse, and so it's not improved, and that is for people who are homeless to be given many citations that, frankly, they just don't deserve. They're called quality of life crimes, things like criminal trespass, sleeping in the wrong place, being in the park. And so I've really documented in this, I don't have time to go over them now, my concerns. And so what I'm hoping that the task force will recommend to the Police Oversight Commission is that they look for trends and patterns and comment on that. I'm also wondering if there couldn't be a standard operating procedure for specifically for encounters with folks who are homeless, because I'm just where I work, we are a mail site, and we hear so many complaints. A few complaints, think there's a pattern, but many, many complaints. And I want to preface also the complaints that I have that mostly are in this document by saying that there are also officers who we have a wonderful relationship with, those of us in homeless services. Today I was with two of the officers at the VA stand down, and it was really great. And there's also was an instance where 4 officers responded who were CIT trained, which is a really good thing, crisis intervention training, when a man had a psychotic episode and he had lost total contact with reality, and they were so kind to him. So this is not a broad brush thing, but there is a pattern. It is more than just a few officers. I think it's a cultural thing within the police APD department. I'm very pleased that there is a new chief of police, and I know it's interim police chief. I hope that the new chief sets a new tone, and hope to also have a standard set at the substations with the lieutenants who are the substation commanders to instruct their officers to go easy with folks who are homeless. They have such a hard time being out there, and to say you should be indoors is just not it's not feasible. And overnights even there aren't enough shelter beds, so people do have to be out in the community, and they just have to be treated with respect. Their personal belongings need to be preserved, and we get a lot of complaints about police officers not returning state IDs. And also when people go to jail, that their backpacks are not secured. That's one of my major, major concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I've got a question, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Karen,
Yeah,
thank you for
question
coming
for you.
tonight. And I certainly appreciate your input on this issue. I think we would do well to hear more from you at some point, because I think there are a lot of issues that you could instruct us on that concern the homeless population. I'm curious, the task force is really charged with trying to identify ways to change the current civilian review process, the police oversight process, so that it can create greater accountability, I think earn greater trust from the community, among other things. And I'm just curious if you have recommendations for us about ways that the citizen complaint process, I guess primarily the citizen complaint process, can be modified so that it best accommodates the needs of the homeless population. And let me just say, one of my particular concerns is whether or not, in your experience, most homeless folks, if they've had an encounter with police officers where they feel their rights have been violated or have been abusive in some way, if they actually know who the officer is, and if they, because I suspect that they may not, I may be wrong, because if they don't, I wonder how we can address that in a complaint process.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Well, I think the lapel cameras can be of great use, identifying both the person who is homeless and the officer. And officers do have name badges. Any person who is homeless should be able, or anyone who's not homeless should be able to say, what is your name, officer, and your man number. Man number is a right as well. And there are occasions where the person who's homeless does know the officer. There's other occasions where they're meeting for the first time. A lot of these encounters are the response of APD patrol car driving through a particular area and stopping. In fact, one of my great concerns is people being ID'd when there is no probable cause that they've committed a crime. Another hurdle for people, even though we have the free phones that are really prevalent now in Albuquerque, people lose the phones, they're stolen, or they only have limited minutes. So when the process is set up that you have to receive a phone call from a police detective who's investigating the case, that can be problematic. So we might look at ways of making it easier for the person to be interviewed. Maybe they can walk in to the Police Oversight Commission office or some other place. And I'm also wondering if we couldn't explore the option of some type of reconciliation where the officer and the person who is homeless have, if the mistreated would have an opportunity to sit down with an officer. And I can think of other suggestions, maybe provide them to you in writing.
That would be great.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have a question. I was wondering if you have, if you could provide the committee here with specific examples of situations, not holistically, but in terms of just some specifics of the best and worst examples of the interaction between, of the kinds of issues you were talking about before. It would be real useful to me.
Sure, would that be all right if I provided that in writing?
Sure.
That would be
yeah,
great.
Absolutely.
That would be ideal.
And we're taking complaints in writing until a few months ago, and we just didn't feel like we were capturing them adequately. But I'd be happy to do that, yes. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Mr. Yep.
If I may, thanks for your handout. I think this is helpful in giving examples. You had mentioned tracking and trending, and it's, excuse me, it sounds like your organization has actually begun to do that in some way, both positive and negative with your constituency. So maybe to piggyback on what you're saying, we have your examples. If you have in your tracking areas of town where things are more problematic or particular locations, and you said that the VA site, things work out well, that would be useful to know what you see, because part of what we want to do in recommending the kinds of things to track and trend is to have an understanding of what's out there, so that when we make a recommendation, we maybe can be more specific as well.
Yes, I'd be glad to do that. And it is very, very hard to track, and part of the reason it is the busyness of those of us. I see probably 30 people in a 5-hour span in a day, and then, but it is important to try that, and I do have samples from when we were taking complaint forms, so we'll try to do that. As far as areas of town, that's a really good suggestion to kind of mention specific areas of town that are problematic.
Thank you.
And we will come up with favorable and disfavorable examples.
Okay. Mr. Lovato, followed by Ms. Durancio.
Almost there.
Mr. Chairman, members of the public forum, thank you. I came before you on the September 17th meeting on my personal incidences, and I'm not going to readdress that. However, during your recommendations, I did go into the website to check out the SOPs. I'm still in confusion on the SOPs, but because they're very, very intense, so I'm still rehashing that. I'm coming before you regarding the October 10th commission meeting regarding CPC 14712, which brought up a lot of questions regarding some of the incidences that I have encountered along with other people that have expressed similar concerns. And I have several questions. One of them out of that situation is, how does a citizen know if the officers and their present are presently under an investigation? We don't know that. And it was stated during that meeting by Ms. Harmon that she felt that because of her backlog and the lack of personnel, that there's a tremendous amount of backlog that she's having to deal with, and that she felt that she needed to retrieve those situations on behalf of the police officers so they could readily perform their duties. However, I'm speaking from the citizen's view that if I encounter an officer, I do not know if he's under an investigative process, and if his arrogance or intimidation is part of that purpose and cause of that investigation. I feel that this committee should recommend to the police department that in some way an officer under investigation should wear a band letting the citizens know that he is under investigation. Second, can the individual that is pressing a complaint during the present investigation be present during the questioning of the officer during that investigation? The reason why I ask that is because a person may be able to submit to the investigator that the complaint was lodged because of several reasons, and then that investigator may be misinterpreting the purpose of that complaint. So I think it's necessary that the person that's issuing the complaint should have the avenue of presence during the investigator's questioning of the officer or officers. Third question is, prior to the final determination by the POC investigator, can a preset of questions be sent to the complainant for prepared purpose? In most incidences, people adhere to being peaceful with the police officer, but for whatever reason, escalations occur, certain situations occur. So what I'm asking is that in order to take out the emotional fact and purpose, is get down to the real purpose and violations. And this allows the complainant to pre-prepare themselves to adhere to the questions that they really need to address and get themselves acquainted with what they're going to encounter. Fifth is, I would also like to see that if you encounter an incident with a police officer, that an ID be forwarded to you upon the ending of that incident, so you know what officer you dealt with or officers that you dealt with, because under this particular situation, under this CPC 14712, it was continually reiterated that there was an officer Q, which nobody could determine. So,
Thank you.
that's my questions.
Sir, could you repeat the last part of that again? Just the last part of your statement. What is it you were referring to?
I was referring to the investigation under CPC 14712 of the October 10th meeting.
Okay.
Okay?
And what were you recommending there at the?
I was recommending that if you have an incident with an officer or officers prior to the incident being reprieved, other than arrest, that you be given a card of identification of those officers that you had an encounter with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next two people after our next speaker are Charles Arison and Jesse Tucker.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Dr. Nicole Duranzo, and I was born and raised here in Albuquerque, and I'm also raising my family here. So I'm very much a stakeholder in this process. I'm very appreciative of this forum and the folks who have spoken up. Very much appreciate that. I also am a licensed psychologist and a member of APD's Behavioral Sciences Division, and so I'm here on behalf of the department. Been following what folks have been saying, been following these meetings, and there's been some inaccuracies that I'd like to hopefully provide some information on. So in the 3 minutes, I'll focus specifically on training, as there was a statement made that APD officers receive less than 4 hours of training on nonviolent conflict resolution when they're having an encounter out in the street with folks, and that's just patently false. So as a member of Behavioral Sciences Division, I can tell you that at the cadet level, so this is even prior to folks becoming sworn officers and going out on the street, we have an over 50-hour block that we teach that includes such things as crisis management, how to recognize signs of perhaps mental impairment, mental illness, crisis, verbal de-escalation. How would you identify someone who's in need? How can you talk to them in a way that's going to de-escalate things and be more effective in that encounter? So that's an over 50-hour block before an officer even becomes an officer. This is at the cadet level. And additionally, we also begin at the PSA level, so police service aid. Those are our 18 to 21-year-olds who are out helping motorists and taking calls like that. They also get mental health, verbal de-escalation training. And then once an officer completes the academy training, again going through that 50-plus hour block, they also then can continue, there's been reference to the CIT team, so that's the Crisis Intervention Team training, and that's an additional 40 hours on top of. So this is for folks who have some experience out in the field, who are getting that additional crisis intervention, verbal de-escalation training. In addition to that, there is our crisis negotiation team. So these are officers that handle even stepped up crisis situations. That our basic CNT is an additional 40 hours on top of everything else. Again, how to recognize mental illness. We also teach officers, how do you connect someone with resources? Perhaps you're in an encounter and there hasn't been a crime committed. How can you get somebody to mental health resources? What kind of referrals can you give? So we have our basic CNT. An additional 40 hours is our advanced CNT, our advanced crisis negotiation training, going even further with the verbal, nonviolent, how do we work towards a peaceful and satisfactory resolution towards an incident. So I want to correct that right away. Let you know that the department, that's why I'm here. I'm not only personally invested, but professionally invested. The department is more than willing and would love to be a part of this process. I think that you as task force members, as well as the community that I'm a part of and raising my family in, deserves accurate information on which to make your recommendations and base your decisions. And we have ongoing review. We're excited. We would love to be available if you have questions. Come look at our curriculum. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Just, yeah.
Sure.
How long has this amount of training been in effect?
So I've been with the department since 2009, and it's been going since then, and I can tell you that it's this specific program that I'm referencing has been going for over a decade. And even prior to that, behavioral sciences has been involved since the 1970s with the department, with kind of ongoing thing, but its current permutation that I described to you has been going on for over a decade.
Do some officers get more training than others?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So everybody gets at least the 50-plus hour block. And that was another thing that was mentioned that's inaccurate about a suggestion that the training is going from 800 hours to 600 hours. My only guess is that's in reference to the recent decision by the New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy Board to lower the state minimum standards. I emphasize minimum. So the minimum used to be 800, now it's 600. What I will tell you is that's only a minimum and was put together so that different municipalities can have better control over their academy curriculums. For instance, law enforcement in Roy, New Mexico would have significant differences than APD. What I will tell you is that APD is not lowering the training hours. We have been and will remain at 800 hours, and we have always exceeded the minimum. So again, maybe that's where the less than 4 hours is coming from the state website. But APD has always exceeded that minimum training and will continue to do so. But yes, some officers get more training than others. Everybody gets the basic, and then officers can move forward with the CIT, CNT. And even when you get to that level, we have ongoing trainings at least monthly, where we have representatives of VA, we have representatives of NAMI, different mental health professionals from UNM and other clinicians from the community that come and do trainings. So you can't get to a level and get certification and just stop. There's ongoing trainings to keep those certifications. Thank you for that question.
Stay with us, there's at least two
Sure.
other questions.
Doctor,
Yes.
the officers and cadets in the training seem to get a considerable number of behavioral health hours. Is that enough? And if so, based on what?
I think that's a great question, and I think that is always what we want to answer. I don't know that that's enough. I don't know if it's too much, so I don't have an answer to that. What I will tell you is that we are actively seeking an answer to that, and again, that's why I'm so appreciative of this type of forum where people can ask these questions. What we do is not only do the officers get ongoing review of how they're doing in the field, how they're doing as CIT or CNT officers, but we as the mental health professionals also put our curriculum up for scrutiny within the department, also at national and international conferences. Our division director, Dr. Troy Rogers, would be here tonight, only that he's in Philadelphia at an international law enforcement conference, learning what's working around the country, what's not working, how do we know what's enough, how do we know if our delivery is effective. So I will tell you, I don't have a definitive answer on that, but we're always looking for improvement on how to do it better.
One more question.
Yes.
If you were to make any changes to the current POC process, from your perspective, what would that change be?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. And I think one thing that I would recommend, and part of the reason I'm here, is to really encourage you all to kind of show me the money, right? So when people come up and they make these claims and they say these things, for you to actually and have the POC commissioners available to look at the sources. Come look at our training, right? Don't just take my word for it. And that would be something I would highly recommend, that people have access to the original sources of information. There's been talk about reports about police brutality in Albuquerque. I've reached out trying to, let's see, give us the information. We want to improve. How can we work together? And so far I haven't received an answer. So I'm hoping that my recommendation would be that you have access to original sources, original data. Commissioners can come to the academies, can come to wherever they need to go to see for themselves what's happening. So that would be probably a start for me.
Okay, you're third.
Thank you.
And
Talk
Peter,
about the 50 hours of original training. Are you telling me that all 50 hours are spent on mental illness?
Not specifically on mental illness. So it's about a 56-hour block, and that's broken down into specific mental illness in general, also specific disorders. What does depression look like? What does PTSD look like? How might you deal with someone with PTSD? Also, there's how do you just talk to people in a way, so maybe during that half an hour or hour, whatever the hour breakdown is, we might not necessarily say PTSD or mental illness, but we will say, how can you talk to somebody in a way that's going to de-escalate the situation? How can you make those decisions? What do you see? What do you hear? And what do you need to do to be a de-escalating force?
Not necessarily mental illness.
So not necessarily saying the word mental illness, but certainly all of it's integrated.
okay,
Well,
I got
just dealing with people, you said you offer monthly training.
Yes.
Is that voluntarily attended or mandatory?
Sometimes it's mandatory, sometimes it's voluntary. So sometimes there will be, different, like CIT or CNT might have a sergeant or a lieutenant that says, okay, UNMH is giving a talk, they have an outside speaker on suicide. Everybody's to go to this, right? And everybody will, and we keep track of who attends. There might be another night where maybe one of our in-house psychologists is presenting on a Thursday night and we're reviewing something else. So that might be, hey, if you can make it, Dr. Duranzo is presenting this, and then we keep track and make sure, are we having someone that never comes? We need to go see what's up with that person and get them there.
Okay, do you have yearly mandatory training for your APD officers?
Yearly mandatory training. I don't know that it's on a yearly basis. Everybody has at least some mandatory training, but I can't say 100% off the top of my head if it's yearly mandatory, if it's on a yearly basis. But everybody you have to meet a minimum standard not only to get the initial training, but also to keep it. But I can't say with positivity that it's a yearly. Does that make sense at all?
Well, it just concerns me if you're not trained yearly on these issues, because it seems to be that's what the problem is.
Okay.
They don't seem to know how to handle people.
Right, right.
And you offering a 50, 60-hour course, 20-hour course.
As a start, yes.
Isn't enough.
Okay, yeah, so certainly, and that's something we want to look at. Maybe it is, we bring different groups in for different blocks every year. I would argue that people get, at least some of the officers, are mandatory far more than yearly training. So it would depend on the breakdown of officers, but I absolutely appreciate what you're saying.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're going to be up here quite a while. Peter, you're next. Then
Well, again,
Fabrizio.
thank you for coming this evening.
Sure, thank you for having me.
I just want to say for your reassurance to some degree, I guess. While I certainly appreciate folks who have come up and have talked about abuse that they've seen happening on the streets of Albuquerque.
Definitely.
For me, what I'm really looking for, what I'm trying to listen for is proposals about how we can alter, how we can modify the POC process.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the facts that I'm paying most attention to. And if you have, if there's anything that you could offer in that regard, how we can make the POC process better, I think that is probably most helpful to us. And
Yeah.
along those lines, I have a particular question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So does your department manage the early warning system? Is that Is that under your purview?
We are part of it, and it's recently changed to the early alert system. And this came out right after the PERF report, some of the recommendations. And what that is, for folks that don't know, is even an officer hasn't necessarily done anything wrong. There's a certain alert that can be triggered. So maybe it's, for instance, anytime there's a canine deployment, that might trigger an alert on the early alert system. And what that is just kind of an indication to the department, let's take a look at what's going on with Officer X. May not be that Officer X is doing anything, but let's take a look. And one option is, hey, we noticed that maybe Officer X has come to our attention, maybe needs a refresher in whatever it is that's happening. It could be on the tactical side, it could be on the behavioral health side. And so let's say, why don't you give Dr. Duranzo or Behavioral Sciences a call, go down and meet with them, and then it's an option for us to be part of that assessment, but it's not kind of the first option. We're sending you to behavioral science.
So are you aware, is there an integration between the data that the IRO collects on citizen complaints and the early warning system? And how does that, how informative is that for what you do when you make an intervention?
Okay, yeah, great question. So that is not my area of expertise, but what I will tell you is they do have some integration. I'm not exactly sure how it works or what it looks like. I'm just sort of one link in that chain, one potential link, but there is some integration, but I couldn't speak more specifically than that.
I mean, I think that is an area I think we could use more input on, and I don't know that we have all the information that we could use to fully understand how the complaint process can feed into addressing those kind of systemic issues through, whether it's through the early warning system or other venues. But
yeah, I think that would be a great idea, and the department is definitely open. And there are certainly people who know much more about that than I do. And part of the reason that I'm here is kind of this open invitation. If you want access to people in the department who can answer those questions with specificity, we're willing to do that as a department.
great, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to take 3 more questions. I'm going to ask your questions be to the point, short and to the point, and if you could make your answers
Sure,
because we have
sure.
a couple more speakers.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, so we're over. No, Fabrizio, you're next.
Okay, Doctor, thank you for coming,
Yes.
first of all. You mentioned, this is quick.
Okay.
I'll try to be quick. I'm a psychologist. We like to talk. Okay.
You mentioned that beyond the 50 plus hours of training in crisis intervention, you also have a special team that gets even extra
Yes.
training. How large is that team?
Oh, I don't know absolute numbers in there. Maybe actually somebody here who can give you the numbers, but it's a fair amount of people. I can't give you an actual number. There's me being short.
Okay.
Yeah.
Considering just the 50 hours, how does that compare to departments' APD size around the country?
APD is often, and again, I mentioned kind of the international and national conferences. APD is always, with whatever the area is, with very few exceptions, I can't even think of any, kind of at the forefront of more than the national average or more than departments. So I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but it's usually at or exceeding most departments.
Just wanted to ask, my colleague asked an interesting question about mandatory annual training.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend of mine that was married to a police officer. He was paramilitary, and then, so I'm not sure if you have PTSD issues from that, but
Okay.
he had some, experiences, traumatic experiences, I'm sure, as a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
She eventually got divorced from him, but he had some problems. He committed suicide this summer, and he was an active police officer. She believes that if he would have had some mandatory training, it would have been a different situation because she felt like him being a man, etc., former Marine, didn't feel he needed any kind of counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think that if mandatory counseling was there, he wouldn't have a choice, and it would have probably helped him.
Yeah, and it's always devastating for things like that to happen, and that's part of our role as behavioral sciences, to try to intervene prior to something like that happening. So let me make a distinction between the mandatory, as I understood your colleague's question, and then what I understand from you. So mandatory being all officers in these roles need to go through mandatory training on how to intervene with someone in crisis or having mental health impairment is kind of what I was understanding from that. Mandatory, what I'm hearing from your example is if an officer's in trouble and maybe exhibiting signs, or how do we recognize that, and then can we mandate that officer to treatment? And the answer is yes. The officer can then decline to go, and the department can say something like, you need to go or you can no longer work as an officer. Let's hook you up with those resources. Often supervisors will try to step in, or other officers, and say, hey man, I think you need to go in. And it can reach to the level where that individual officer is mandated for training or behavioral health intervention.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate your question. Thank you.
Charles Harrison, followed by Jesse Tucker.
Thank you. I'm here once again to ask that you do not wait until the end of the year to make recommendations to the City Council and immediately pass a resolution recommending the termination of the current IRO, Robin Hammer. Under City Ordinance, POC rules and regs, and the duties of her contract, Ms. Hammer is required to promote independent oversight, instill confidence in the complaint process, strengthen the relationship between the Albuquerque Police Department and the community it serves, conduct outreach to the Albuquerque community, and propose and openly report on meaningful policy recommendations to the Albuquerque Police Department. Let me give you a few examples of how Ms. Hammer has failed in failing in all of these requirements. As to independent oversight and instilling confidence in the complaint process, there is a current and long-standing APD SOP 01-20 that requires the use of in-car video systems to record police contact with the public that could result in complaints against department personnel. Ms. Hammer has exonerated probably hundreds of officers in citizen complaints where this required evidence has been withheld, and in doing so has shown that she is not independent and has made a joke of the complaint process. Additionally, Ms. Hammer, as an officer of the court, left the DA's office under a cloud due to her withholding exculpatory evidence in a criminal court case. In my opinion, and many others, Ms. Hammer as an individual simply does not have the personal ethics or moral character needed for her position as the RO. She is simply the wrong person for the job. As to strengthening the relationship between the Albuquerque Police Department and the community it serves, several months ago, Ms. Hammer overstepped the bounds of her office and stopped a required POC civil rights attorney training session simply because the attorney was pointing out that current APD SOPs violate federal law when it comes to the detention of witnesses to an alleged crime. Many citizens have come before this task force and spoken about APD retaliation. If the IRO is willing to retaliate in an open, televised meeting without any repercussions, what is the public at large to assume? Additionally, there's been no required POC civil rights training since that incident many months ago. As to conducting outreach with the Albuquerque community, Ms. Hammer has conducted no community outreach until the POC created an outreach subcommittee to take up the matter. At their last meeting, Ms. Hammer was heard to say that she simply does not have the time to go out and make the required community presentations, partly because she has taken it upon herself to attend your meetings. Additionally, Ms. Hammer has failed to take advantage of the multiplication powers of multimedia to produce a videotape presentation and post it on her city website page or on the City Council's YouTube channel, something I'm glad to see your board has embraced. May I finish?
Thank you. Well, how much more do you have?
Just a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
As to the proposing and openly reporting on meaningful policy recommendations to the Albuquerque Police Department, she has made no reports as to these types of recommendations on a myriad of issues. Just to name a few, we still have the APD SOP that violates federal law concerning the detention of witnesses. We still have ongoing rampant philandering inside APD that no doubt contributed to the death of Tara Chavez, numerous APD police officer domestic violence cases, and most likely a number of APD officer suicides. And now we have what must be, and I have not heard her speak to this at all, what must be a new set of APD SOPs concerning the new powers and responsibilities of non-sworn police service aides that even the APD officer union admits will place these untrained and underarmed youngsters in harm's way. I could go on.
Thank you.
Point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jesse Tucker, followed by Jean Pauls, is it?
Might it be possible for us to have a copy of the comments that you made, just in case that you didn't, the last speaker?
Sure.
Charles, sorry, we have a
Yeah,
copy
I
of
have
that?
it.
You do have,
Yeah,
okay.
he gave me a
That's
copy.
fine, as long as we have one. No, thank you, appreciate
have
it.
Okay, sorry.
Hello, Chairman. I have quite a few suggestions for what I see as problems in ABD here. One, of course, is I believe these lapel cams need to be made mandatory. I think that they should be on every officer for every case, and I believe if they are not, if they don't provide video evidence of any interaction with the community, the case needs to be dropped. It's critical for the public and the police to have a understanding and cooperation with each other, and right now there isn't. Right now the public does not trust the APD at all. They are very mistrustful, and they, and for good reason. And the lapel cams provide a lot of security, not only for the police, but for the community, and that needs to be, I think, set up. And, the idea that, when things go down, they don't have the video or it wasn't recording or anything, that's ludicrous to me. They don't get in their car when it doesn't have gas in it, they don't make sure their guns are loaded, they make sure everything else is put together. They should make sure their lapel cams are working. And I think that needs to be made much more mandatory than it seems to be, because I see a lot of cases where, the lapel cams are just dropped, or, the video evidence is not there of whatever incident happened. And I think that would provide a lot more security and a lot more cooperation with the public. I think they were, understanding with the public. They would be able to trust what is going on a lot more than is happening. And I know that the police, the Albuquerque Police Union is trying to change the mandates with the lapel cams since the Rice case happened or whatever recently, and that needs to not happen. I think they need to be stricter. I think that needs to be made. I don't know. You get what I'm saying. Anyway, I'd also like to say that I think there's a lot of fear in the public about calling in, police misconduct, and we seem to have to go through APD to get any reports made. We have to go through APD to get into the internal affairs kind of things, and I have made plenty of reports myself of really awful things that I think should be, looked at and, dealt with, that I think are just buried because they have to go through the department itself, and it's a little disturbing to me. I would like to see something that isn't under APD that you can kind of report to, and that has, the ability to look at these complaints and these processes and be able to have more than just a suggestion of what should happen. I think it should be a separate thing that we can report to an organization or whatever that looks at it and has the power to actually fire cops that aren't, living up to the community's standards, I think it's very important. There are plenty of cops that have many complaints against them and are still on the force, and it's not safe for anyone. And I have a lot of other things I could probably bring up, but
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this gentleman?
I have a question.
Okay.
They're down in Las Cruces and even in Los Angeles, they've come up with something called the Giglio clause, where if a police officer has a record of complaints, routinely and a lot of complaints, that the Giglio clause says that the DA's office will no longer pursue cases that this police officer is involved with. Do you think that would be handy in these here in Albuquerque?
Well, doesn't that mean that the cop is still on the force, though? Like, it seems kind of pointless to continue to pay a cop who's not doing his job and who can't really do much for the police department anyway. I would like to see if an officer isn't doing his job and is in fact, causing more problems than good, he is no longer employed. It would seem to help, everyone a little bit.
But I think that would be the ultimate case, is that if a police officer has been giglioed, then they can no longer pursue cases, which means that they're pretty much rendered, not useful.
I think that would be helpful, at least. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jean?
Mr. Chair, I've got one question.
Okay.
Sir, you had talked about ability to make complaints other than through the police department itself. They're supposed to be through the mayor's office and through the city staff ability to make complaints. I must admit, I don't know exactly how that would be. So it sounds like what you're saying is possibly making it clear to the public that there are alternatives other than bringing a complaint and making that explicit.
Yeah, I would like to see that. Like, so far, I've called 311 for, seeing cops street racing up residential streets, and, they transfer me over to a sergeant at ABQ that I talked to, that, and I gave my name and all my information, which should, and then transfer it over to the Internal Affairs Department. But I've heard nothing back from that case or others that I've made of that sort. So it's sort of, I don't know what other ways to do that. I guess there is,
So you're saying an additional thing that if you make a complaint that you would like to hear that it's been received and processed and that you don't necessarily get that information?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything of that, and I think it's also part of, people are paranoid of talking, dealing with the cops, especially in police matters for fear of retaliation and, rightfully kind of, being afraid of, being able to say anything, and so I think having something separate would be helpful, something that isn't controlled by the police somewhat, but has enough power to be able to do something as well.
Mr. Tucker, do you have a recommendation of who that would be?
Not so much who, but I think like maybe some sort of, publicly elected, commission that, we the people elect a group of individuals to be able to look at complaints and stuff, under the police department, or, that are made to the police department, that, so that we can, have a little bit of control of who's going, if somebody's not fulfilling what we think is, needs to be done, they can be voted out, so but it needs to be a separate sort of thing than the police department itself somewhat.
An elected body is what you're looking for?
An elected body, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker.
Thank you.
I'm glad I'm speaking after him because, some of the things he said triggered off a lot of thoughts that I wanted to tell you. Right now the public confidence in the police department is so low. I'm a teacher of 31 years, and just in my 12 years in Albuquerque, I have witnessed quite a bit of police brutality. I believe, and I hope I understood her wrong, but I thought that the woman that was training the police, I thought I heard her say that she hasn't seen much in the way of evidence for police brutality, which just sends chills through me because I have, and I'm a teacher. So I'd like to say that I think that I'm really glad that this group is here trying to figure out how to solve the problem. I think what you need to do is really restore public confidence in the police department. Right now, it's at a very low point. I've got to say, just in comments in the classroom among students, again, it gives me chills to see how little confidence there is in this police department. I think the Police Oversight Commission should really answer to the public. I think that, you know, if they were elected, not in a partisan election, but a straight yes or no vote, like some judges have to be elected back and forth, you know, year after year, yes or no, do we keep this person? Then that takes some of the partisan stuff out of it, and the individual Police Oversight Commission really does answer to the people and not to someone else. I think that the Police Oversight Commission should have the power to fire police officers, to discipline police officers, that they should truly have the oversight. I think in the past, and I hope it's not in the present, the mayor and the police chief have had the opportunity to override the decisions of the Police Oversight Commission. That is so not okay, because you know, there's not a whole lot of confidence in the police chief, and I think that it's kind of an inbred system at that point, if that's what's happening. It really needs to be something that answers to the public. I can understand where some details of some situations, I mean, like, I don't know, I feel a little ignorant on this as to whether or not the Police Oversight Commission meetings are public. I can see where some, are they public? Good, okay, well, great, that's great, I feel reassured by that. I think the decisions should be public, maybe they are, I hope so. But the decisions about this police officer or this case, whether this person was cleared, the police officer was cleared or not, I think that should be public as well. I had heard in the past that maybe that wasn't public, and I hope it is. Let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to say that I didn't say yet. The giglio thing, I don't think that's enough. You know, if an officer has been giglioed, what does that mean? He should really not be in that position. If he can't pursue cases because of his continual errors or misjudgment, I really don't want to see him have the power over people. I have a friend who almost had a heart attack and died because of an 80-year-old friend who was put in a hot police car over a dog and almost died in that car. I really think that we need to come. I just really think, I hope that you guys can really pull this together.
Thanks very much. Don't go away. Are there any questions? Please speak. No, okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I have no other speakers no other folks that signed up to speak, so I'm going to proceed with the agenda. The next item is task force discussion of the proposed roadmap. All the members of the task force were emailed the proposed roadmap, which includes a subcommittee structure. It was also distributed tonight. It's in your packet this evening. So I want to call on Fabrizio to quickly go through that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will. You have seen an earlier version of this roadmap, and so I will not go through the details of it because it's going to take too much time. I think that the part that is in that outlines the phases is pretty much unchanged from the previous draft that you have already seen. The one portion of the handout which is actually received more of a change is the structure of the subcommittee system in order to accomplish the work. What the approach of the subcommittee, and I should point out that this was not a unanimous concurrence with the approach to the subcommittee structure, but a majority of the subcommittee did agree that we should probably look at the guiding principle that the CCP, the Citizen Complaint Process, is the main charge of this task force, and that therefore the task force as a whole should look at that particular process specifically as the full task force. There are, however, a number of issues that we've discussed in the past and some new ones that are peripheral, but they do impact and inform the citizen complaining process. And we thought then that those issues should be perhaps assigned to a number of different subcommittees. We picked 4 different subcommittees and tried here, as you can see, to define their scope. And the number 4, the 4 is not a, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it is just based on practicality. We have 11 members, and if you have a lot more subcommittees than that, you end up having double and triple assignments, which makes it pretty awkward for all of us. So in any event, I know that the chairman also wants to speak about, have some comments about the subcommittees, and I know some, but I think the appropriate thing to do would be for me to move this for adoption, and then we all can comment.
Hold off on that, because before we move, let me say that I guess capitalizing on what you were saying, these subcommittees are still somewhat in flux, so they're not set in stone, but they will cover the general areas that are described in the document. There might be some tweaking of the scope of those subcommittees, but in general, they're going to cover the areas that are described there. So what we need you to do is look through those. A couple of people have responded already, and let us know which you're most interested in so we can assign people to the proper subcommittees. And further, if you're interested in chairing one of those subcommittees, to let us know as well. My intent is to appoint the subcommittees and the chairs by the next meeting, which is October the 24th. So I just wanted to, now, are there any, yes, I know some other people wanted to comment, and then we'll entertain the motion.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I served on this committee, and I certainly appreciate the great work that was done to bring together such a complex task and distill it into a document like this that sets forth a plan for us to try and come through with a report by the end of the year. And I'm largely in support of the current proposal. My concern is that is the subcommittee structure, and I want to highlight a couple things. One is I'm a little concerned about the focus that each of the subcommittees has, because from my reading, I have a hard time really figuring out what each of these committees is tasked with. It feels to me a little confusing, and in some ways that's sort of due to the titles of the subcommittees, and maybe more than anything, it's the third committee that I find hard to figure out what that committee is going to do. I think that at the end of the day, a couple of things that we want to make sure we accomplish with this task force, a couple of key questions that we want to try and address with this task force, whether it's done in the subcommittee process or in the larger task force, are these. One is, I think we have to grapple with the question of, is the role of the POC really to review citizen complaints and pass muster on individual complaints against individual officers, or does the POC have a mission of addressing systemic problems and policy changes? And I see those two as being in a sort of a tension with one another. The gathering citizen complaints informs the ability to identify systemic trends and possible policy changes. it hasn't been clear to me from what I have seen happening on the POC right now that the POC dedicates a lot of energy to policy discussions and systemic change. And I would like us in this task force to devote some serious attention to the question of, if we're going to make a change to the task force process, to the POC process, does it try to get at the ability of the POC to devote more of its energy to looking at those bigger, broader systemic issues? I want to make sure, for my money, that should be well integrated in our plan. Whether it happens in the full task force process or subcommittee is another question. Another key question that I see coming up is the tension between the labor agreements and the collective bargaining agreement, and the degree to which we can have mechanisms of accountability that are created by the POC process, by the citizen complaint process. There are some constraints on what the POC can do to hold officers accountable, and as a result of the CBA. And that affects the question that I think one of the people who spoke raised, which is, can the POC actually mandate discipline for an officer? And it's my understanding that the answer is no right now under the CBA, under the collective bargaining agreement. That's something that I think should be explored more fully, as well as the degree to which mediation can serve a role in addressing individual citizen complaints, which I think is also probably constrained by labor agreements. And looking at the question of how does that mediation actually take place. I'm in full agreement with creating a subcommittee that devotes some attention to the education, training, and qualifications of POC members. I think that is a very important area. But I would urge the task force to take a close look at whether we are getting at these other two questions. That is, citizen complaint process versus systemic and policy change, and mechanisms of accountability versus labor agreements. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Peter, I think those issues are contained within the scope of various of these subcommittees, all the issues, I believe, that you just raised. But having said that, I want to refer back to what I said a little earlier. We do have a subcommittee that's going to tweak these a little more. So there might be some slight changes there, but I want to assure you that the things that you raised, I believe, are covered here. Let me toss it back to Fabrizio so he can make a motion that we approve this general roadmap, recognizing that besides the
That's what you're saying, okay? And this is sort of a plan to get the work done. So that's the difference. My intent certainly was to have all of those issues covered. I think those are the primary issues that we need to really focus on. I agree absolutely with that. But, and I do believe that they are covered in the description of the subcommittees. I will go ahead and move adoption of this document. Again, understanding that it is a flexible document, that even the subcommittee scopes will probably be massaged as we move forward and get informed about other issues. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move adoption of the roadmap.
Okay. The motion doesn't need a second because it's a report out of a subcommittee, so I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of accepting the roadmap, please raise your hands.
Are we going to have any other discussion about the motion? Mr. Chairman, after the motion, and you're right, it doesn't need a second, it's appropriate for there to be discussion.
Yeah, if there's further discussion, sure. Yes, sir.
I did not participate in this subcommittee, and obviously a lot of work was put into it, so I feel, perhaps a little embarrassment of going against it, but I do think it's premature to vote for this or to make the motion and approve it based on the fact that there are some things that need to be changed. I know it's a document that can be adjusted in so forth, but I just feel it's premature, so I'm gonna vote against it with the understanding I know a lot of work went into this. You can read it and see that, but I'm just not gonna be able to support it at this time.
Other discussion?
Yeah, and that's sort of following in line with that line of discussion here. By what process will changes be made to this document? We know that it's not set in stone, but I'd like to know what the process would be in the event we need to make changes to the document, whether it's dates or definitions, or we want to make additions or deletions. By what process will that take place?
Well, depending on the vote tonight, you may see a whole new set of, not new set of task forces, subcommittees, but new descriptions. The process would be one of the subcommittees that's been working on this might make some additional changes to the subcommittee structure, like I said, and overall roadmap is somewhat flexible depending on when speakers are available, that kind of thing. But under any circumstances, the full task force will always have the ability to vote on these things. That's why we're bringing it to you this evening. In fact, this is the third or fourth iteration of this document. We've shared earlier versions with you as well. The addition, the big addition this evening really was the subcommittees. And as you can hear, Peter's on the subcommittee. So am I. We're still, and there's some disagreement over the exact language of some of those subcommittees. So I want to continue the discussion and see where it goes and then decide how to go about this.
We're voting to approve the motion in principle subject to change, this document.
Yes, I guess that would be fair.
Yeah, that would be fair. That would be fair. Yeah, I guess my sense would be that, you know, what I'd like to see is some notion that, yeah, we need to move forward, and this is sort of generally the way to do it, and then if we have wordsmithing or changes that are required, that we might bring it either back here to the full task force next, the next meeting, or send it back to feed it into the subcommittee, and then we will try to address it and bring it back out to the full task force for final adoption. So that would be kind of my sense of how this would work. But again, it is flexible, and I recognize that there's a lot of stuff in here.
We accept it as a general guide.
I would say that's a fair way to put it. Peter?
So I guess my just a couple of comments in that regard. One is, if I understood you correctly, Chair, you would be asking us to actually propose which committee we'd like to serve on, which subcommittee we'd like to serve on. And my concern is that if we don't really know what those subcommittees are going to do yet, if there's going to be changes to what those subcommittees are going to be doing, and I'm hearing that we're leaving that open as flexible, it's going to create a bit of a dilemma for people to decide what they would volunteer for. I just wonder, would it make sense for the purposes of trying to move forward to put aside for the moment the makeup of the subcommittees, devote a little more attention to that, and move forward with a formal vote on the plan itself, because there's quite a bit more to the plan that goes beyond just the subcommittees. And for my money, the debate's really about how we want to organize these subcommittees, and that, I think, is set against it's not clear to me what work we're going to try and accomplish as a full group, as a full task force, versus what the subcommittees are for. And maybe that requires more clarity as well. We've got quite a full agenda that this plan has created for us. And so I think it would be easy to be overly optimistic about how much we're going to be able to really delve into some of these more detailed issues in the full task force meetings, given how much is on our plate.
Well, that's exactly the reason for the subcommittees. The subcommittees are going to be charged with looking into more specifics and looking deeper into these subjects. But I understand the concerns that are being expressed around these subcommittees. There's two ways I can handle this. One way, I want to reiterate again that I do not anticipate that the general scope of what each of these subcommittees is going to cover is going to change. There might be some small language changes, but not in terms of the scope of each of those kind of 4 areas. They're kind of 4 broad areas. So you could vote to ratify it, and there might be some additional tweaking by individual subcommittees once they meet. They may tweak their charge a little bit. So I think there's some room for flexibility there. Having said that, we can do 2 things. We can vote tonight and accept the whole thing and still ask people to respond in terms of what subcommittee they want to serve on. And hopefully by October 24th, I'll make those assignments, and then those committees can meet, and if they need to tweak it a little more, they can do that. The other thing to do would be to accept the roadmap portion of what was presented to you tonight and hold off entirely on the subcommittees. The problem I see with that is we have an enormous amount of work to do, as you just identified, Peter. And part of the reason we want to establish the subcommittees, I'm kind of repeating myself, is to get some of that work done so it doesn't have to be the full task force, and those subcommittees will report their findings back to the task force to look at the whole picture. If we go ahead and vote and accept the whole thing with the subcommittees, it gives us the next week or so for folks to look at it and get back to us with which subcommittee they want to serve on, so we can move forward by the 24th and ask those subcommittees to set up meetings and start moving on the information they need to gather. If we postpone it, then we won't have ratified the subcommittees until the 24th. It puts us out even further. So that's the dilemma. Anybody else want to make any comments? Otherwise, I'll probably call the question. Go ahead.
I guess I'm still a little bit unclear about what the tasks of each of these subcommittees are. Is it just to educate themselves about these particular areas and then report back, or
yes,
what was the?
It's to examine those particular areas and report back to the full task force, so that those things can hopefully be incorporated into the general recommendations that we're going to make. In other words, it's piecing out some of the important work that needs to be done into subcommittees that will report back to the full task force. Am I being clear? I hope.
What was that motion again? We may have to just re-clarify the motion so that it takes into account the discussion that we've had.
And I had another question, which maybe we'll just get into the same thing, whether you were moving to adopt just the roadmap or also these subcommittees.
Mr. Chairman, my original motion was to adopt the whole document, okay? And with the understanding that it is particularly the subcommittees, obviously, those are very important, and maybe you did not have enough time to really, go through it, and so I understand that. So those could be flexible. Now, but the motion that I put on the table is to adopt the whole document. I'm not necessarily totally opposed to an amendment. You could propose an amendment and move forward with something. I don't. That's the purpose of having this discussion. Okay. You don't have to vote for it or against it. You can propose some other way. No one is a magician in this group.
Yes.
If I may, just procedurally, and this will be very important if we delegate more responsibility and more work to subcommittees, and that is the work of the subcommittee belongs to the task force.
Sure.
And it's not a fait accompli when it comes up here. It can be massaged, it can be, accepted whole cloth or modified. So I just want to give you all the comfort, if you will, that this document belongs to you at this point.
Any other comments? Motions? Okay, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of accepting now it's the full document, including the subcommittees, please raise your hand. I got 3 yes votes. Those opposed? 2, 3, 4. Are there any abstentions? Okay, I counted 3, 4, and 4 against. So the motion is defeated. Is there another motion someone wants to make?
I would move that we accept the full roadmap with the exception of the committee descriptions, and then we come back to the next task force meeting, which I believe is next week, with maybe refined committee descriptions that the planning committee could work on in the interim, and maybe get something out in advance of that meeting so that committee members have a little bit better chance to review the information, and that we try to pass the committee structure at that meeting.
Okay.
Second.
Discussion on the motion? No discussion, okay. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of accepting the roadmap with the exception of the subcommittees, which will be handled as a separate document, please raise your hands. Okay, it looks like it was unanimous to me. One somewhat reluctant vote, but nonetheless, it was unanimous.
You can't fight him joining, right?
Right. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Thank you for passing that. We'll accept the roadmap as is. I don't anticipate any significant changes to the, I'll call it the work plan section of the roadmap, other than maybe some dates or speakers. We'll call a subcommittee meeting to work on correcting, updating the subcommittees so that everybody's comfortable with it. And I'm still going to try and get this out as soon as possible. So after this evening's meeting, I'm going to call my cohorts on the subcommittee together so we can set up a meeting, what's today, Thursday, for this as soon as possible, tomorrow or Monday or something. So that you, my goal would be that you have the subcommittee structure and descriptions in your hands before the meeting on the 24th, so that you can both give us feedback and tell us which committees you want to serve on, and we can ratify it. If possible, I would like to come prepared to that meeting, prepared with suggested chairs and members of these subcommittees. I know it's short time, but we really need to keep moving forward.
Mr. Chairman, maybe a good idea would be if there are any specific requests for changes to the subcommittees, that those get submitted to us so we can incorporate that into our meeting.
Yeah, that was, I believe, covered in the email you got with this. So yes, please do that. Forward them to John. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the announced dates and locations of upcoming meetings. I have the next meeting scheduled for October the 24th. It's a task force meeting, and it's at the 9th floor of City Hall in the meeting room. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to tonight's meeting? If not, then I'll just, before I close, say that I believe we are going to the Neighborhood Association meeting this evening right from here. So we'll be speaking to a coalition that is actually several neighborhood associations that are meeting in Manzano Mesa this evening. So Ed and I are going to go and speak to them. So with that, if there's no further business, I'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you. Peter and Fabrizio.
Yeah.
You guys.
Yeah, she's going after now. No questions. Can we get back on? I haven't heard the motion. Oh, you're sorry, I got off to a rocky start.
No, not at all. It's better then than now.
Send it on to me and I'll make sure I get it.